So in this video we're going to be looking at how we write ionic equations. Before we attempt to write ionic equations, you need to be sure you're happy with how we work out the ionic formula of a substance. So I would suggest that you go over that before you look at this video. So an ionic equation is just an equation where we're only writing what's changing in the reaction, not the complete reaction. So, for example, if an ion stays as a solution, we wouldn't include it in the ionic equation because nothing's changing to that ion. It started as a solution, it ended up as a solution. So it's only showing us what's actually changing to those constituent ions. So we have a series of rules. The first of which is to split the ionic substance into their constituent ions. Okay, so for example, I've got a reaction of sodium sulfate reacting with barium chloride. So I know that the formula of sodium sulfate is Na2SO4. I know that the formula of barium chloride is BaCl2. And I know that that's going to make sodium chloride, which is NaCl, and barium sulfate, which is BaSO4. So all I do is I split those ionic compounds into their constituent states. So sodium sulfate would become 2 sodium ions and a sulfate ion. Barium chloride would become a barium ion and 2 chloride ions. Sodium chloride, remember I've got 2 moles of my sodium chloride, so it would become 2 sodium ions and 2 chloride ions. And barium sulfate would become a barium ion and a sulfate ion. I know the states of my substances because I know it's a precipitation reaction. Remember, I know that this is the test for a sulfate 2- ion. So I know I'm going to make barium sulfate as a solid, and the rest of my constituents are going to be in the aqueous state. So once I've split my ionic substances up, my second rule is if the ion has changed state, include it. If the ion has changed charge, include it. So I can look at my different ions and I can see that the sodium ion has started off as a 1+ charge and it's ended up as a 1+ charge. The sulfate ion has started off as a 2- charge, it's ended up as a 2- charge. The barium ion started up as a 2+ charge and ended up as a 2+ charge. The chloride ion has started off as a 2+ charge, and ended up as a 2- charge. So, none of them have changed charge. What about the state? Well, I can see that my barium sulfate ends up as a solid. I can see that the barium starts off as a solution and the sulfate starts off as a solution. So, I would include those ions. So we can see that in our substance we've got the barium ion and the sulfate ion that have changed state. They started off both as solutions, they've ended up both as solids. The sodium ion started off as a solution, it ended up as a solution, so we ignore it, we cross it out. The chloride ion started off as a solution, it ended up as a solution, we ignore it, we score it out. So when I'm going to write my ionic equation, remember, I'm only concerned with the ions that either change charge or change state. So on my reactants I've got barium 2+ as a solution, and I've got sulfate 2- as a solution, and I'm making barium sulfate as a solid. So my ionic equation would be the one that I've written below.